In the small, quiet town of Havenwood, nestled deep in the heart of Ohio, where ancient trees lined the streets and every house boasted a well-kept garden, lived a couple who were considered the epitome of harmony. Emily and Michael seemed to lead an enviable life. Their home was cozy, a true haven surrounded by carefully planted flowers and a pristine lawn, a testament to Emily's meticulous care and love. A beloved elementary school teacher, Emily was known for her kindness and dedication. Her students adored her, and within the community, she was seen as a loving, gentle, and trustworthy woman. Michael, on the other hand, was a successful businessman, deeply involved in the town's activities, always participating in local events and helping to shape Havenwood's future. Among their friends, one figure stood out: Sarah. Charismatic and confident, Sarah was Emily's longtime friend. Their friendship went back to their college days, a period full of memories they often revisited with laughter and confessions. Sarah was like a sister to Emily, someone she trusted completely, sharing her deepest secrets and worries. One evening, Sarah was invited to dinner at Emily and Michael's home. The night seemed like so many others they had shared, but something was different. As Emily sat at the table, she watched her two guests closely. The seemingly warm and familiar atmosphere hid a tension that Emily could no longer ignore. Subtle details, fleeting glances, and smiles that lingered just a second too long began to stir an unease within her that she couldn't explain. As the dinner went on, Emily's mind drifted. Every word exchanged between Michael and Sarah seemed laden with hidden meaning, something only they understood. Distrust began to grow inside her like a seed planted in fertile soil, fed by every subtle gesture that would have gone unnoticed by anyone else, but which to Emily was an indication of something darker. She felt a chill down her spine, a sensation that something was terribly wrong, something she couldn't ignore. In that moment, the false harmony surrounding the trio started to crumble in Emily's mind. Sarah's laughter, once so familiar and comforting, now sounded hollow, as if hiding a truth that was about to be unveiled. Emily's heart raced as she tried to rationalize what she was feeling. After all, Sarah was her friend, her confidant. Michael was her husband, the man with whom she had built a life. How could anything be wrong between them? But Emily's intuition wouldn't let her rest. Convinced that something was off in the dynamic between Michael and Sarah, she started paying even more attention to the little details. She strained to find any clue, any evidence that could confirm or deny her suspicions. And although she desperately wanted to be wrong, something inside her told her that the truth was closer than she imagined. The dinner finally came to an end, but Emily's unease only grew. She knew something had changed that night, something that, though still shrouded in the shadows of doubt, would soon come to light, revealing a betrayal that would shatter her life as she knew it. And when that truth finally emerged, Emily knew that nothing would ever be the same. In that moment, not yet fully aware of what was to come, Emily felt the first spark of a pain that would soon ignite into an uncontrollable fire. One night, while Michael was in the shower, his phone buzzed on the bedside table. Without intending to invade his privacy, Emily picked up the phone and saw that a message had come in. Sarah's name flashed on the screen. "I can't wait to see you tomorrow," read the message, accompanied by a heart emoji that made Emily's stomach churn. For a moment, she thought she might be overreacting. After all, Sarah was her best friend, and affectionate messages between friends weren't uncommon. But something about that text deeply unsettled her. There was a tone she couldn't ignore, something more intimate than a simple friendship should allow. Doubt began to settle in her mind like a poison. Emily tried to push away the feeling that something was wrong, but the seed of suspicion had already been planted. In the days that followed, That message continued to echo in her mind, eroding her trust and peace of mind. She found herself watching Michael more closely, searching for signs of a betrayal she feared was happening right under her nose. Determined to uncover the truth, Emily began to investigate discreetly. When Michael left the house, she would check his phone, looking for more messages, calls, or any evidence that could confirm her suspicions. Each discovery made her more anxious, and the fear of being right grew with each passing day. Small details that would have previously gone unnoticed now took on a sinister meaning. Michael's frequent absences, his increasingly flimsy excuses, the evasive look he adopted when she asked about Sarah. All of this fueled the fire of doubt that burned in her chest. Finally, unable to bear the uncertainty any longer, Emily confronted Michael. She waited until they were alone at home, where he had no escape. With his phone in hand and her heart racing, she showed him Sarah's message and asked, with a voice trembling with anger and fear, what it meant. Caught off guard, Michael tried to deny it. He made excuses, said Sarah was just joking, that there was nothing between them. But Emily knew her husband too well. She saw the guilt in his eyes, the sweat starting to form on his forehead. And when she pressed him further, the truth finally came out. The shock hit her like a punch to the gut. Emily felt the ground open beneath her feet as Michael admitted to the affair with Sarah. The pain was intense, a double betrayal that left her reeling. It wasn't just the husband she loved who had betrayed her, but also her best friend, the person she trusted the most. The combination of anger, sadness, and despair began to consume her mind, and she found herself in a sea of conflicting emotions. But instead of exploding, Emily forced herself to remain calm. She pretended to accept the situation, letting Michael believe she was willing to forgive him and move on. Inside, however, a dark storm was brewing. Every fake smile, every word of acceptance, was another brick in the meticulous plan of revenge she was building. She knew she couldn't let this betrayal go unpunished. Something inside her, a part she didn't even know existed, demanded justice, a retribution as deep and painful as the suffering they had caused her. Her friendship with Sarah became a facade. Emily continued to see her, to go out with her, but every moment spent with her former friend was torture. While Sarah laughed and pretended everything was fine, Emily was mentally crafting every detail of what was to come. She planned to make Michael and Sarah pay dearly for what they had done. The betrayal would be answered with something much deeper, much more painful. And when everything was done, Emily knew she wouldn't be the only one to suffer the consequences. They would all face the justice that she, with her own hands, was about to impose. Months before discovering the betrayal that would devastate her life, Emily, Michael, and Sarah had planned a trip to an isolated cabin in the mountains of Vermont. It was supposed to be an escape from routine, a time to relax and enjoy the tranquility of nature. The cabin, surrounded by dense forests and far from any trace of civilization, was the perfect retreat. What should have been a peaceful getaway, however, became the stage for a meticulously crafted plan. A plan that would turn those quiet mountains into witnesses to an act of revenge. From the moment the betrayal was revealed, Emily began working on her plan, masking her pain with smiles and false promises of forgiveness. She knew that the trip would be the perfect opportunity to execute her revenge. The isolation of the cabin would ensure that no one interfered, and the remote setting would allow her to create a convincing narrative for what was about to happen. Every detail was planned with frightening precision, as Emily patiently waited for the right moment to act. On the last night of the trip, after a candlelit dinner that anyone would have said was pleasant, Emily prepared drinks for Michael and Sarah, toasting to friendship and the good times shared. But while the two smiled and raised their glasses, Emily knew that the contents of those drinks were far different from what they appeared. She had laced them with a substance that would render them unconscious within minutes. She watched them drink, her heart beating in a calm and controlled rhythm, while her mind raced with anticipation of what was to come. As Michael and Sarah began to feel dizzy and eventually fell into a deep sleep induced by the sedative, Emily acted quickly, with surgical precision. She tied them both to chairs in the center of the room, ensuring they were completely immobilized before they woke up. The stage was set. Now, all that was left was the revelation. She sat, waiting patiently for the drug to wear off and for them to regain consciousness. When they finally opened their eyes, it was as if they were waking up to a nightmare. The initial confusion quickly gave way to panic as they realized they were tied up, helpless. Emily, calmly seated before them, showed no sign of emotion. She watched in silence as reality began to dawn on them, the fear growing with the realization that they were completely at her mercy. "Did you think you could deceive me?" Emily's voice was firm, almost emotionless. She revealed in detail everything she had discovered about the affair. Every message, every lie, every betrayal. Michael and Sarah exchanged panicked glances, desperately trying to break free. But the bonds were tight, and the coldness in Emily's eyes told them there was no escape. Michael began to plead, trying to appeal to Emily's compassion, while Sarah, tears streaming down her face, begged for their lives. But there was no sign of compassion in Emily. She was beyond pain, beyond anger. All that remained was an unyielding determination to make them both pay for what they had done. They needed to understand what it was to lose everything, just as she had. Without hesitation, Emily began to execute the final phase of her plan. She staged the scene to look like a murder-suicide. She created a narrative in which passion and despair had driven Michael to kill Sarah before taking his own life. Every detail was carefully planned to deceive any investigation that might follow. Emily was determined to ensure that even after death, Michael and Sarah would bear the blame for the tragic fate she had orchestrated. The coldness with which Emily acted shocked Michael and Sarah, who realized there was no longer any room for redemption or forgiveness. Emily was completely transformed, her pain channeled into an act of revenge that left no room for regret. She watched as the life slowly drained from them, their desperate eyes fixed on her, unable to comprehend how it had come to this. But for Emily, this was the inevitable end of a story of betrayal. In the silence of that isolated cabin, she finally felt at peace, knowing that her justice, however terrible, had been served. The air in the cabin was thick with tension, like the calm before a storm. Emily, her gaze fixed on Michael and Sarah, was about to finish what she had started. But in that moment of cutting silence, Michael, driven by desperation and adrenaline, managed to partially free himself from the ropes. The sound of the cord snapping broke the silence like thunder, and in an instant, chaos erupted in the cabin. Michael, his survival instinct kicking in, lunged at Emily, trying to disarm her. The impact was brutal, knocking over furniture and scattering objects across the wooden floor. The struggle between the two was fierce, with grunts of effort and pain echoing off the cabin walls. Emily, though smaller and less strong, was driven by an uncontrollable fury, a hatred that had been fed by months of betrayal and hurt. Michael tried to grab the knife she held, but Emily, with a strength that seemed beyond her capacity, resisted with all the energy she had left. In the midst of this brutal confrontation, the blade finally found its target. In a swift, desperate move, Emily stabbed Michael in the abdomen. The blow was deep, and blood began to pour out immediately, staining her hands and the blade with a bright red. Michael let out a cry of pain that echoed through the room before collapsing to his knees, life rapidly draining from his body. Emily, her eyes burning with determination, watched the man she once loved fall before her, his breathing growing weaker until he finally succumbed to the inevitable. Meanwhile, Sarah, witnessing this horrific act, desperately tried to flee. She stumbled over the overturned furniture, trying to reach the door, but her panic made her clumsy and vulnerable. Terror consumed her as she ran towards the only exit, but Emily, still holding the bloodstained knife, would not let Sarah escape. This was her chance to settle the score, to impose her own justice on those who had betrayed her. Emily caught up to Sarah before she could open the door. In a final act of desperation, Sarah turned and tried to fight, grabbing Emily by the hair, scratching, trying somehow to break free from the impending death. The two of them clashed in a desperate struggle, the cabin floor stained with Michael's blood and their screams mingling, Emily seeming possessed by an insatiable desire to finish what she had started. The fight was intense but brief. Emily, with a determination bordering on insanity, managed to overpower Sarah. With one last effort, she plunged a knife into Sarah's chest, ending the struggle in a brutal, bloody manner. Sarah's body fell to the floor with a dull thud, and the cabin, which had been the scene of such chaos moments before, plunged into an eerie silence. Emily, now covered in blood, stood in the middle of the cabin, breathing heavily. She looked around at the bodies of Michael and Sarah, feeling a strange sense of justice done. There were no tears, no remorse, only a dark calm that settled over her as the blood dripped from her hands, pooling on the already soaked floor. But Emily knew there was still more to be done. She couldn't leave any traces, couldn't allow anyone to discover what had really happened there. With a coldness that could only come from someone who had crossed the line of no return, she spread gasoline over the furniture, walls, and floor of the cabin. Then, she struck a match and dropped it onto the flammable liquid. The flames spread quickly, consuming everything around her. Emily walked out of the cabin, watching as the fire devoured the structure, destroying all evidence of her act. She knew the fire would eliminate any proof, any trace that could link her to the crime. To her, all of this was justified. What Michael and Sarah had done deserved a response in kind. And now, enveloped by the heat of the flames and the darkness of the night, Emily felt that justice, however grim, had been served. The sun had barely risen when the first police officer arrived at the scene of the fire. The cabin in the mountains, now a charred ruin, still smoldered. What was supposed to have been a peaceful retreat had turned into a nightmare. Initially, the rescue team believed the fire to be accidental, perhaps caused by an improperly extinguished fireplace or a short circuit, something common in old, isolated structures. But when firefighters began sifting through the rubble, what they found completely changed the course of the investigation. 2 bodies were discovered among the ashes, and what should have been a domestic tragedy quickly turned darker. The remains of Michael and Sarah didn't show signs of death by asphyxiation, as would be expected in a fire. Instead, investigators noticed visible wounds, marks indicating a violent death before the fire began. The inconsistencies at the scene, combined with Emily's strange behavior during the identification of the bodies, raised the first suspicions. With the community still in shock over the fire, rumors began to circulate. People who knew Emily, Michael, and Sarah started talking about the tension they had noticed between them in the preceding months. Soon, investigators uncovered the love triangle that had formed and the betrayals that had unfolded in the shadows. Emily, once seen as a sweet and caring woman, was now looked upon with suspicion. Her apparent calm in the face of the loss of her husband and best friend seemed not only strange but almost cold. Determined to get to the bottom of the matter, investigators revisited every aspect of the case. Interviews with friends, family, and neighbors began to paint a more complete picture of what might have happened. Details that once seemed insignificant began to stand out. Conversations Emily had with friends about justice and betrayal took on a different meaning. That forced smile on her face, the rehearsed answers, and her almost mechanical behavior became pieces of a puzzle that detectives were determined to solve. Emily, for her part, tried to carry on with her life as if nothing had happened. She returned to work, maintained her routine, but the weight of suspicion began to affect her. In the small town of Havenwood, where everyone knew each other, the stares of people on the streets became unbearable. Whispers followed her steps, and what once was a peaceful and respected life turned into a nightmare of insinuations and growing fear. Each day, Emily felt the pressure mounting. She knew they were getting close, but she maintained her facade of innocence with a determination only she understood. Finally, investigators were able to connect all the dots. With circumstantial evidence, statements, and Emily's suspicious behavior, she was arrested. The ensuing trial was a spectacle for the small community. Everyone was present, eager to understand how someone so seemingly normal could have committed such a heinous crime. Throughout the process, it was Emily's coldness that shocked everyone the most. She showed no remorse, shed no tears, and her answers to the lawyer's questions were direct, almost calculated. When the guilty verdict was announced, few were surprised. Emily was sentenced to spend the rest of her life in prison. Even incarcerated, she showed no remorse. To her, what she had done was necessary. Michael and Sarah had betrayed her trust, destroyed her life, and she believed their punishment was just. In the solitude of her cell, Emily maintained her conviction. She believed that, in some way, she had restored balance in her life, albeit at the cost of 2 lives. And so, in Havenwood, the story of Emily, Michael, and Sarah became a local legend, a dark tale of betrayal and revenge that would be told for generations. Emily, now an almost mythological figure, lived in her own world, where justice and revenge were 2 sides of the same coin. Havenwood would never be the same. The tranquility that once defined the small town was shattered by the shock of the crime that shook each of its residents. The people who once prided themselves on their close-knit and peaceful community now found themselves tormented by a mix of fear and mistrust. What happened to Emily, Michael, and Sarah became the main topic of conversation, a story told in whispers and furtive glances. It was a dark tale of betrayal and revenge that quickly turned into a local legend, passed down from generation to generation, always with a tone of warning and sorrow. Within the cold walls of the prison, Emily faced the consequences of her actions with a disturbing serenity. Day after day, she spent hours reflecting on everything that had happened, but unlike what many might have expected, she felt no regret. To Emily, everything she had done was necessary. She believed she had paid a fair price for her inner peace, a price that, though high, left her with a strange sense of balance. Michael and Sarah had destroyed her life, and she, in return, had destroyed theirs. In Emily's mind, justice wasn't something reserved for the courts. It was something she had executed herself, with a coldness that both frightened and comforted her. While Emily lived confined in her own reality, the community of Havenwood struggled to move on. The tragedy left deep scars, not only on the victims' families, but on everyone who had known the trio. The sense of security that once permeated the town was replaced by an emotional void, where trust was hard to restore. Entire families were affected, friendships were destroyed, and for many, simply passing through the town became a painful reminder of how hatred and betrayal can devastate lives. Lessons about the consequences of betrayal and hatred were widely debated. In churches, schools, and community meetings, residents discuss what could have been done differently. The case of Emily, Michael, and Sarah was used as an example of what can happen when one allows resentment and pain to guide their actions. Some saw in the story a warning about the importance of resolving conflicts through dialogue and understanding. Others, however, were consumed by the fear that something similar could happen again, creating an environment of excessive caution and widespread distrust. But in the end, what truly remained in Havenwood was the echo of lives destroyed by a revenge that consumed everyone. The tragedy spread like a wave, affecting not just those directly involved, but every person unfortunate enough to be a neighbor, colleague, or acquaintance of a trio. The case, which dominated headlines and conversations for so long, was eventually closed, but never forgotten. The cabin where it all happened, now just a pile of ashes and memories, became a symbol of the cruel fate that awaits those who let fury and pain guide their actions. Today, the ruins of the cabin are avoided by many, but occasionally visited by those seeking to understand what happened or simply to remember the events. It is a place of silent mourning, where the wind whispers secrets that will never be fully revealed. For the older residents, the story of Emily, Michael, and Sarah serves as a constant reminder of the dangers of unresolved hatred. For the younger ones, it is a legend told around campfires, a narrative that mixes fear and fascination, and carries a timeless warning. Revenge can consume everything you have, leaving only emptiness and destruction in its wake.